GLC presents, brought to you by the donations of our faithful partners.
Shalom. I'm Eddie Chumney of Hebraic Heritage Ministries, and we welcome you today to our study on the Hebraic roots of Christianity. We need to remember that when we're studying the Hebraic roots of Christianity, we must keep everything centered on Yeshua the Messiah. Because we're told in Psalm in chapter 40, verse 7, "Then said I, Lo, I come, in the volume of the book it is written of me." This verse is quoted in Hebrews in chapter 10 in verse 7, referring to Yeshua, that the scriptures are written about him. Yeshua himself said in Luke in chapter 24, verse 27 and verse 44 the following: "And beginning at Moses and all the prophets, he expounded unto them in all the scriptures the things concerning himself. And he said unto them, These are the words which I spake unto you while I was yet with you, that all things must be fulfilled which were written in the Torah of Moses and in the prophets and in the Psalms concerning me." So Yeshua tells us that the Hebrew scriptures are written of him. We are currently doing a series to explain how this is so. The series is Yeshua from Genesis to Revelation, and this is program number 26, and the title of today's program is Zion and the Song of the Lamb. That Yeshua is in the Torah. He created the heavens and the earth. He made covenant with Abraham. He led the children of Israel out of Egypt. He is the lawgiver at Mount Sinai. And there was a marriage that was made at Mount Sinai between the lawgiver, who is also the bridegroom, that is Yeshua, to his bride, that is the house of Jacob, or the nation of Israel. But the house of Jacob, or the nation of Israel, was an unfaithful wife. She broke the covenant, went after other gods, and as a result was exiled into the nations of the world. It is the role, task, and function of the Messiah to gather and unite the 12 tribes of Israel. Among the places where we can see this is Jeremiah in chapter 23 and Ezekiel in chapter 34. Then Yeshua himself said that he died on the tree or the cross for the purpose of uniting the 12 tribes of Israel. He told us this in John chapter 10 in verses 16 and 17, and then this is repeated in John chapter 11 in verses 49 through 52. So twice in the book of John we are told that Yeshua died on the tree for the purpose of uniting the 12 tribes of Israel. What Yeshua's ministry emphasized in his first coming and his death was paying the price to forgive the sins of the house of Jacob or the nation of Israel in breaking the covenant. That the physical regathering of the 12 tribes of Israel will take place at his second coming. And so we're looking at the events that surround Yeshua's second coming that relate and pertain to how the 12 tribes of Israel are going to be regathered in the end of days. And the details of this is given to us in the book of Revelation. That the setting of the book of Revelation, in Revelation chapter 1 and verse 10, John writes, "I was in the Spirit on the Lord's day." The setting of what he's sharing is the Lord's day. And this term, the prophets refer to as being the day of the Lord. The Lord is Yeshua the Messiah, as the day of the Lord is associated with his revelation. Revelation chapter 1, verse 1, the revelation of Yeshua HaMashiach. That the day of the Lord is the period of time that the prophets tell us that the 12 tribes of Israel are going to be regathered, that Yeshua is the Lord and his day is the Messianic era. Each day in the Bible has an evening and a morning. And the evening part of the day of the Lord being 1,000 years of time, that the evening part of the day of the Lord is the tribulation period. And it's in the tribulation period that the 12 tribes of Israel are going to be regathered. Jeremiah chapter 30 and verse 3 tells us that Israel and Judah are going to return to the land, and it tells us that they're going to do that, Jeremiah chapter 30 and verse 7, in a period of time known as Jacob's trouble. So in order to understand further the details of the events that are going on that sets the conditions for the 12 tribes of Israel being regathered, that is what we have been covering in the last several programs. That the big outline of understanding these events is that in the day of the Lord, the nations would divide the land of Israel, Joel in chapter 3 and verse 2, and divide the city of Jerusalem, Zechariah in chapter 14 and verse 2. And this will result in the judgment of the nations. And in judging the nations, we are told about the fall of Babylon and the Babylonian system. And the book of Revelation mentions in several places about Babylon and the fall of Babylon in the context of the judgments that are going on in the world. And through the fall of Babylon, it's when Babylon, the Babylonian system falls, that the 12 tribes are going to be regathered to the land of Israel. And the way in which this is going to happen is patterned after the historical Egyptian Exodus. That Pharaoh being judged is a prophetic foreshadowing of the beast in the beast system of Revelation chapter 13 being judged when the God of Israel gathers his people, that he brought the children of Israel out of Egypt while judging Egypt and Pharaoh, and he is going to be gathering the 12 tribes of Israel from the nations where they've been scattered when he judges the beast system and brings judgment on this world system. So those details are specified for us in the book of Revelation. And specifically, the part of the book of Revelation that deals with the uniting of the 12 tribes of Israel is Revelation chapter 7, the calling of the 144,000. Revelation chapter 12, where it talks about a woman given birth, and then the fleeing into the wilderness for 1,260 days. And then we have Revelation chapter 15 and verse 3, where it tells us that those that get victory over the beast and the beast system, that they sing the song of Moses and they sing the song of the Lamb. And so this is what we want to give you a little bit more of an insight on in this program, is explaining what is this song of the Lamb that is being sung during the tribulation period. And the issue of dividing the land of Israel and the city of Jerusalem, it's called in Isaiah in chapter 34 in verse 8, it's called the controversy of Zion. That when the 12 tribes of Israel get united, this is referred to as biblical Zion. And what does biblical Zion look like? It is the Messiah being recognized as the Messiah by all 12 tribes of Israel, that the 12 tribes of Israel are united and gathered from the nations where they've been scattered, returning to the land of Israel, and they're following the Torah of the Messiah. That is biblical Zion. And Zion in Hebrew contains the Hebrew letters Zadi, Yod, Vav, and Nun. And there's another Hebrew word that has the exact same letters as Zion. In Hebrew, you would say Zion, and that is the Hebrew word Zion. Zion in Hebrew is Zion, Zadi, Yod, Vav, Nun, and Zion is Zadi, Yod, Vav, Nun as well. And Zion means a sign. That in understanding the details of how the 12 tribes are going to be gathered, significant in this is the return of the northern kingdom, or the house of Joseph, or Ephraim, to the land of Israel to join themselves with the house of Judah. And we're told about Ephraim returning to the land in Jeremiah chapter 31, and beginning in verse 15, where we're told that Rachel is weeping for her children, and she's not comforted. Then she's told in verse 16 to refrain herself from weeping. Now, if she's going to refrain herself from weeping, what emotion she's going to express is joy and singing. And what we're going to see is that the uniting of the 12 tribes of Israel is associated and likened to singing and joy, and thus we have the song of the Lamb. And Jeremiah 31 verse 17, Rachel was told that her children will return to their own border. And when they return to their own border, she's told that she can refrain from weeping. And who is this referring to? It's referring specifically to Joseph and his family. That would be Ephraim and Manasseh. And so the 10 tribes are named after the dominant tribe, and that is the tribe of Ephraim, who is the son of Joseph. Jeremiah 31 verse 20, is Ephraim my dear son? Is he my pleasant child? And then in referring to Ephraim returning to the land, it says in Jeremiah 31:21, set you up waymarks. Now, the word in Hebrew here that got translated as waymarks is Zion, and Zion means a sign. So how is Ephraim going to know when it is time to return to the land? Well, he needs to be given a sign. What is the sign that he is given? It is the birth of Zion. How is biblical Zion going to be born? It's going to be born out of a rebellion against the creation of a Palestinian state. Because the modern nation of Israel, it was formed by a secular Zionist movement. It was not a religious movement that brought about the current state of Israel. It was a secular Zionist movement. And we can see the prophetic fulfillment of that in Ezekiel chapter 37, where first the dry bones, they came to life and they were given flesh when they stood up, but there was no wind, or there was no ruach in them. And following them returning in their flesh, then they are given breath. They're given the ruach. And that breath that they're being given is the birth of biblical Zion. The birth of biblical Zion will birth the awareness and the acceptance of who the Messiah is, and biblical Zion will gather the 12 tribes of Israel. And when the 12 tribes of Israel come together, it is associated with a grafting. And this is what Paul explains in Romans in chapter 11. That in English, the word S-C-I-O-N, which comes from the Hebrew Zion, which we spell today Z-I-O-N, that S-C-I-O-N is the term given in horticulture for the grafting process. And so the 12 tribes coming together is a graft. It's the bringing together of northern kingdom, southern kingdom, Ephraim, the 10 tribes in the house of Joseph, being united and being one with the house of Judah. And this coming together means the end of the exile. And the end of the exile is a time of celebration. It is a time of joy. In the Bible, it is likened unto the joy of a marriage. In Jeremiah, in chapter 33 and verse 11, it says, the voice of joy, the voice of gladness, the voice of the bridegroom and the voice of the bride. This is marriage talk and the joy of marriage. And what is the voice of joy and the voice of gladness being associated with in this verse? At the end of the verse, that's Jeremiah 33 verse 11, it says, for I will cause to return the captivity of the land as at the first, says the Lord. So the uniting of the 12 tribes of Israel, which is called Zion, which Zion, Zion in Hebrew, it's linked with a sign that the God of Israel is given. It is linked with grafting. And now what we're going to see is Zion is associated with joy and gladness. It's associated with singing. It's associated with the song of the Lamb. And if we go to Psalm 137, and in verse 1, it says, by the rivers of Babylon we sat down, we wept when we remembered Zion. So the setting here is in Babylon, in exile. And notice what you do in Babylon. You're not singing, you weep when you remember Zion. And then it says, we hanged our harps on the willow. In Babylon, in exile, you're weeping for Zion and you hang your harp on the willow. Well, if your harp is hanged on the willow, you're not playing it. So in that situation, verse 3, there they that carried us away captive required of us a song, saying, sing us one of the songs of Zion. They're mocking Israel in exile. And so here's the answer. How shall we sing the Lord's song in a strange land? And the Lord's song is now called in Revelation in chapter 15 and verse 3, it's called the Song of the Lamb. For they sing the song of Moses, the servant of God, and they sing the song of the Lamb. So this verse is a reference to the uniting of the 12 tribes of Israel, because in singing the song of Moses and the song of the Lamb, they're doing it in Revelation chapter 15 verse 2 with harps. So in Babylon, you hang your harp on the willow, and therefore when you leave Babylon, when you return to the land of Israel, you are able to play your harp, and what you do with that harp is you sing the song of Zion, and the song of Zion is the song of the Lamb. And the reason why the uniting of the 12 tribes of Israel is called the Song of the Lamb is because it is something that the Messiah does. It is his song that he accomplishes. And Yeshua, John chapter 1 verse 29, is called the Lamb of God that takes away the sins of the world. So this is his song. It is the song of the Lamb. Now this is mentioned in Psalm in chapter 98. And in verse 1 it says, sing to the Lord a new song. Because the uniting of the 12 tribes of Israel from the nations where they've been scattering is something that has never happened before. So it is a new song. For he has done marvelously. His right hand and his holy arm has gotten him the victory. And so it's the right hand and the arm of the Messiah that gives the victory for the exiles of Israel and brings them back to the land. But in doing so, he's fighting against the enemies of Zion, those who are opposing the return of the 12 tribes back to the land. In Revelation chapter 13 tells us that that is the beast and the beast system. That would be the New World Order. That would be one world government. And those who are playing the harps and singing the song of Moses and the song of the Lamb, they get the victory over the beast and the beast system. Revelation chapter 15 verse 2, I saw as it were a sea of glass mingled with fire, and them that got the victory over the beast, over his image, over his mark, and over the number of his name. Those who get the victory, they have the harps of God, and then they sing the song of Moses, and they sing the song of the Lamb. In Hosea, in chapter 2, we're told about this in verse 15, and it says, I will give her her vineyards from there, and the valley of Achor for a door of hope. Achor in Hebrew means trouble or troubling. And it says that the valley of Achor, or the valley of trouble, or the time of the tribulation, is a time of hope. Why is it a time of hope? Because she will sing there. During the tribulation, the 12 tribes are going to be united. She will sing there as she sang in the days of her youth, as she sang when she came up out of Egypt. So when did she sing? That is Exodus in chapter 15. And the song that was sung there, which is known as the Song of Moses, that song is sung once Pharaoh and his army were defeated and when they drowned in the Red Sea. It says in Exodus chapter 15 verse 1, Then sang Moses and the children of Israel this song unto the Lord, saying, I will sing. They sang, I will sing. What they sang, it's indicating they're going to sing again in the future. What they sing again in the future, Revelation 15 verse 3, is the song of the Lamb. And it says, I will sing of the Lord, for he has triumphed glorious, the horse and the rider he has thrown into the sea. The Lord is my strength, he's my song. He's become my salvation. So the Lord is my song, and when he's my song, he is also my salvation. Now, preceding this, in Exodus in chapter 14, we see the situation beginning in verses 1 and 2 when the children of Israel are being instructed by the God of Israel to camp by the sea. And as a result of this, in verse 3, Pharaoh sees and believes that they are trapped, that they are entangled with their situation. And as a result, Pharaoh goes after the children of Israel, and he sends 600 chosen chariots, as we're told in Exodus chapter 14 and verse 7. And as a result, the children of Israel got afraid. They were scared because in the natural they were entrapped. But the key verse is Exodus in chapter 14 and verse 13. Moses said, Fear ye not, stand still, see the salvation of the Lord. The word salvation in Hebrew is Yeshua. That's the Hebrew word for Jesus, Yeshua. So we have a pattern here that we're going to see Pharaoh and his army coming after the children of Israel, and the children of Israel are going to be afraid, and the God of Israel is going to defeat Pharaoh and his army who come after the children of Israel. The one who defeats them is the right hand and the right arm, and they're seeing the salvation of God, and they're singing a song. So now that theme is associated with the second coming, that the gathering of the 12 tribes of Israel is going to be seeing the salvation of God, the revelation of Yeshua as the Messiah, and the joy of getting the victory over the beast and the beast system, who is going to oppose the uniting of the 12 tribes of Israel, just like Pharaoh did, that when the beast and the beast system gets defeated, then the 12 tribes being regathered, they're going to see the salvation of our God. Yeshua is going to be revealed, and they're going to sing. They're going to sing the song of Moses, and they're going to sing the song of the Lamb. So, by having a Hebraic background of the Scriptures, we can understand from Revelation in chapter 15 what verses 2 and 3 are referring to, and how they are associated with the role of the Messiah to gather and to unite the 12 tribes of Israel. In Jeremiah, in chapter 31, we can see that the gathering of the 12 tribes of Israel is likened to a song, because it says in verse 7, "Sing with gladness for Jacob, shout among the chief of the nations, publish ye, praise ye, and say, O Lord, save your people, the remnant of Israel." And so we see that the gathering of his people is likened to singing and a song. Well, we pray that the program has been a blessing to you today as you're understanding the role of the Messiah to gather and unite the 12 tribes of Israel in the end of days. Now remember always these words from 1 John chapter 2 and verse 6. He who says he abides in him, he who says he's a believer in Yeshua as Messiah, ought to walk as he walked. How did Yeshua walk? He kept the Torah, and we as followers in him should do likewise. Shalom in Yeshua the Messiah. Amen.